Good morning, everybody. Good morning, friends who are here in the Gann Chapel. And good morning, our friends who are online with us. Let us thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we will begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha be'Yisrael. V'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha be'Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So good morning, everybody. Today what I wanted to do was to share with you the content of Micha Goodman's talk that he gave yesterday to the rabbis of the Rabbinical Assembly. He was at home talking to over 100 rabbis, giving us some ways to think about this moment in Israel. And it was very powerful and also very emotional. So first what I want to do is just share with you what Micha said as best as I can in the order with which he said it. And he framed his whole comments by saying that he was going to be asking for American Jews for something. And he would tell us at the end what it was that he was going to be asking us for. So what he said was that the events of October 7th were an apocalypse, an apocalyptic event. And he said that the root of apocalyptic, and it's first found in the New Testament, is it's a revelation. In an apocalypse, something is revealed. And he said basically that there were three things that were revealed on October the 7th. The first is the unbelievable, incredible cruelty of Hamas. And he said that, believe it or not, took himself by surprise. He knew of their charter, but he didn't realize that they really meant it. And that the kind of cruelty that they perpetrated on innocent civilians, he said it, everybody was straining for metaphors and analogies to try to understand it. It's like Kishinev pogrom, but that it's actually many Kishinevs. Far more people died on October 7th than Kishinev. So like the worst pogrom massacre that we have was insufficient, both in terms of the quantity and the quality of the cruelty. So he said the first revelation was that Hamas's evil that's at least at the level of Nazis. And that Nazi is not a category of what happened in 1941 to 1945. Nazi is a category that is alive and well, that Hamas hates us with that level of intensity. That's the first revelation. Second, I'm just going to close the door so we don't have ambient noise. Excuse me for a minute. By the way, this was really interesting, and it had an immediate consequence. He said, he was talking to American rabbis. He said, your prayer is not for peace. They're not looking for peace. They're looking for victory. And in Hebrew, it's biyachad nenatzeach. Together we will be victorious. We want victory, not peace. So he said, don't talk to Israelis about we wish for peace. They don't want peace, they want victory. And what they want is Hamas dead, done, eliminated. That is the move. So ceasefire and peace and all this stuff, not. So actually we're doing a program tonight. And one of the songs that Elias and the clergy team was going to sing was an Oseh Shalom. We took it out of the program, because they're not looking for Oseh Shalom. They're looking for Nitzachon. They're looking for total victory over Hamas. And he said to he said, how will we know that we have achieved the victory? We'll know if people are prepared to live in those communities again, in those communities down south again, where the massacre happened. Will people be so forever freaked by the memories of what happened on October 7th that no one would ever live there? That means they didn't win. And victory means that they could go back and live in those communities. So that, and he said, if people say, let's do a ceasefire or stop the war and da-da-da, he said, say to them one thing. If Hamas is left in power, would you and your family live in Sderot? Because, of course, the answer is no. It would happen again. So that was the first revelation, total cruelty. Second revelation was the absolute goodness and solidarity of Israeli society, and that there's such a level of Israeli altruism and solidarity that he had never seen before. And he said that, he shared this, and I had quoted it in the sermon based on his podcast, but he said the Israeli army asks for more reserves than they need because they usually assume that 70 to 80% of the people they ask for will say yes, but 20% will say no. He said everybody asks, and everybody they've asked are coming, and people they didn't ask are coming. That they have 150% of reserves, and that there's just a tremendous amount of altruism. He also said, so that there's a renaissance. The next thing that he said about what we've learned is Israelis, he said, this was so powerful, Israel is not the same after October 7th. And Israelis are not the same after October 7th. And he said that Israel is different and Israelis are different, and it will take time for all of this to get defined and crystallized. But he put it this way. He said there have been, Israel's 75 years old, there's 4 generations in Israel. And the first generation, the founding generation, had an acute sense that Israel is a miracle and that Israel is fragile. And what the world looks like without Israel is October 7th. And that October 7th was a black hole for Israel. It was the Kishinev massacre happened in Kishinev, and Khmelnytsky massacre happened in Poland and in Ukraine and Poland and Eastern Europe, not to mention, obviously, the camps. Jews were slaughtered. What made this unique was that the slaughter happened in the land of Israel. And there was no state of Israel. The state of Israel existed, but sovereignty didn't exist. For 12 hours, there was a black hole. And he said it gave everybody an image of what awaits us if we don't have Israel. That what awaits us is massacre and blood and bloodshed. And so he said the following has happened to Israeli society. The first generation was aware of the miracle and was acutely grateful for the miracle and fought to preserve it because they knew what would happen if they didn't have Israel. And the second generation had that a little bit less, but they had it. And the third generation had a little bit less, but they had it. And the current generation lost it. The current generation thought that Israel is impregnable, thought that Israel is unassailable, thought that Israel is forever, and that therefore they could afford to take their eyes off the ball. And he said, when you think about what Israelis were fighting about on Yom Kippur, which is a machitza, how you daven in public space in Dizengoff in Tel Aviv, and that Israeli society had become degenerated and deteriorated to the point that religious and secular Jews were fighting about a machitza on Yom Kippur, that this kind of was a wake-up call, that they don't have the luxury of fighting about stupid stuff like that. They don't have the luxury of fighting about stupid stuff like that, because if they fight about stupid stuff like that, tragedy ensues. And so he then said, So this is going to be a renaissance of Israeli spirit. And then he did the following Torah, which is that the world, as we read it in the Parshiot we're reading now, gets created twice. God creates it in Genesis, Bereshit, destroys it in Noah, and then recreates it in Noah. So the world took God two shots to create the world. The Luchot Habrit, the tablets of stone, got created twice. The first one, and then of course the shattered of the golden tablet, the golden calf, and then the second set of tablets. And Micha said that Israel is going to be very different when they get on the other end of this. That he doesn't know what it will look like, but he knows it will be different. That they're going to have a constitutional convention, and they're going to have to think about the relationship between the Haredi and the rest of the country. And there's just a lot of open issues that were allowed to fester that can't fester. And that there's going to be, that God created the world anew a second time and created the tablets anew a second time. And Israelis are going to have two foundings, the founding in 1948. And then he said, quite hauntingly, the founding in 20, and I don't know when this will end. But on the other end of when this will end, they're going to have to recreate society. So then, and then he had the following paradox, which I've just been thinking about, that when you think something is here to stay, it's not here to stay. When you think something is forever, it's not forever. And that the fourth generation in Israel committed the sin of thinking that Israel was here to stay. And without awareness of its finitude and ephemeralness, nothing is here to stay. But the flip side is that if you're acutely aware of fragility and vulnerability and danger, then you can make it here to stay. So the paradox of forever is only by thinking something is not forever can you make it last. And the minute you think that it's forever, you're in trouble. And that's what happened to Israel on October 7th, that all of the social ills and divisiveness and tensions and controversies had so weakened the country that October 7th happened, and that when they get on the other end of this, they're going to recreate their society. A second set of tablets, a second world after the flood. So that is, and he said, by the way, one last thing he said, that part of the recreation is the value of modesty, that everybody got so much wrong, and that everybody has to let go of so many tenets that they got wrong. And he didn't tell us what tenets he got wrong, but he said he got a lot of stuff fundamentally wrong. Israeli leadership, Israeli society got a lot of things fundamentally wrong, and part of their second tablets, their second creation, the second world, the second founding of Israel after this in 20, whatever it will be, is to have the humility and modesty to let go of a lot of mistakes that Israeli society had made. So that was, and they're going to have to rewrite the contract and come up with a whole new social contract for Israel. He said, what they've, one last thing, and then I'll just pause for comments, thoughts, and questions, and then I'll give you the ask that he has asked us for. He said the driving insight of October 7th is that people always thought the Holocaust was a different planet, just a different planet. And now they realize the Holocaust is next door. And so they're not doing Yom HaShoah, to commemorate what happened 80 years ago. They're dealing with the Holocaust in real time, their neighbors across the fence. And and then he was, I'll just end with this vignette and then we'll pause for thoughts, comments, and questions. And then I'll come to the ask that he asked us. He was very emotional. Micha is always, profound, but has a cheerful affect. He's optimistic, and he's radiant, and he's robust, and he's smiling, and he laughs, and even in challenging times, he projects optimism. And at a few points in his talk, particularly when he was talking about altruism in Israel, he just broke down and cried. And then he said, Israelis do that a lot. They just break down and cry. And he said that he was just on a Zoom right before the rabbis with his students, because he's been, for the last number of years, he's been a teacher to Israeli 20-somethings and early 30-somethings who are post-army. And those are precisely the people who are in the reserves, who are on the edge of Gaza now. And he said, they're such beautiful people. They're brilliant. They're graduates of the finest schools. They're doctors and scientists and business people and experts in technology and medicine and healing and poetry. And they are all now in their army uniform, awaiting imminent orders to go into Gaza. And everybody knows that Gaza is a bloodbath. And everybody knows that it's mortal danger. And he said their basic voice is they don't know if they'll survive. They don't know if they'll be alive on the other end. And many of them are married. And many of them have spouses and children back home. But they said, and then he started to cry, he says they're Anashim Kedoshim, they're holy people. They're Anashim Kedoshim, they're holy people. And that they say it's not about us. It's not about us. It's about Am Yisrael. And if Am Yisrael is going to chai, if Am Yisrael is truly going to be alive, we need Israel. And if Israel is going to be alive, we need to defeat Hamas and eradicate it. And so if we have to die in service of that goal, so be it. And he said that, so, Anashim Kedoshim, holy people. So you could hear a pin drop during this whole talk, but what I took away from it is just that as urgent and serious and scary and menacing and sleep-depriving as it all is, he has a vision that on the other end of it, please God, we should get to the other end of it, Israeli society will be able to recreate itself and be healthier and stronger. And he said, in the end, we're going to have a fourth generation that has the power and the abundance of the fourth generation with the awareness and the gratitude and the appreciation of vulnerability of the first generation. And therefore, the intensity of protecting this fragile miracle of the first generation. So that is his talk for the first part, and I will then, I wanted to just open it up, and again, because we are online as well with our friends, I wanted to give anybody an opportunity to respond with questions, thoughts, comments, and then I'll give you Micha's ask of American Jews and diaspora Jews. Wendy Landon.
So is he saying secular Israelis seek religiosity or more seeking, and it's too soon to come more to terms with their Judaism? And similarly, are you seeing Haredi saying, sign me up for the military, I'm going in to protect my land?
No, he didn't go into those details. He was talking at a higher level, but for a long time, I mean, his whole project has been the first part of what you asked about. In other words, secular Israelis have been, well before October 7th, have been on journeys to find meaning in Judaism and to rediscover Judaism, and have been doing, these are people who grew up knowing nothing about Yiddishkeit. and every year we have a delegation of kids from the reality school in Haifa come, and they look more out of place in synagogue than the most secular kids from our kids' most secular schools at a bar mitzvah. Like 12-year-olds at, Bigelow look much more at home in shul than Israeli kids from Haifa who literally have never been inside a synagogue building. And when they grow up, completely secular and treat Yom Kippur as a bike day because the roads are empty, somehow many of them end up in his institution, Beit Prat, and they, as adults, discover for the first time that there's actually meaning in Judaism and meaning in Yiddishkeit, and try to and discover the meaning of the Jewish part of the Jewish state. So that's been an ongoing project. He didn't talk particulars about what that would look like. Mary Donoff.
Did he come out and say, or the implication was that Hamas was picking a time that Israel is particularly vulnerable?
Oh, he's been saying that, yeah.
And this was well planned around the political upheaval right now in Israel.
Yes, he's been saying that, others have been saying that, but he's been saying that for months. In fact, the Sunday, September 9th, which was the Sunday before Rosh Hashanah, Micha was kind enough to do a conversation with us that Sunday morning. And he said, I would never forget this, that all Israelis are united on calling September Black September for two reasons. One, the court had a hearing about the Knesset legislation, and he said whatever they come out with, half the country will say that the country is no longer a democracy. If they sustain what the Knesset did, the progressive wing will say it's not a democracy. If they strike it down, the more Haredi wing will say it's not a democracy. So, and there's no way to bridge that. That's what he said. And then he said, it's also Black September because we're completely divided, broken, and dysfunctional as a society, and our enemies know this, and if we don't get our stuff together, they're going to pounce on us. And he said that he said that on September 9th, and he had been saying that constantly. And now, of course, in Israel, I think there is a lot of volcanic anger at officials and at what had happened to Israeli society over the last 8 months. But everyone is saying now is not the time. That there will be, hopefully, they get to the other end of the war and they destroy Hamas and they create order and peace. And then peace in Israel, not peace with Hamas. They destroy Hamas and they create a sense of well-being again. And then there's going to be a lot of autopsies about how that happened and who's to blame, etc. But he's been warning that for a long time, as have other people. Monica Grimberg, if you're tapping the phone and the mic for our friends online.
Thank you. Is he concerned about future world opinion about Israel? Now he has a lot of support from world Western leaders and American Jewry, etc. Is he worried that once they start showing more casualties in Gaza, the tides will turn and Israel may be alone?
Yeah, so thank you, Monica. So the question is he worried about the tides of opinion turning and et cetera? And the answer is definitely yes. And so that brings us to, thank you for the segue, to his big ask. He said that Israel, there is no left or right or center. There is just unanimity of opinion within Israel that Hamas must be destroyed. And Hamas uses civilians as shields. We all know that they plant their bombs and missile rangers in preschools and hospitals and mosques, and they're down in tunnels, like the Hamas infrastructure is down in tunnels, and civilians protect Hamas. So that if Israel wants to get down to the tunnels, they have to kill the civilians. So he said Israel is actually caring for the civilians by telling them to leave because Israel does not want to kill them. Israel wants to spare civilians and get to the military targets underneath, and Hamas is telling civilians to stay. because Hamas wants civilians as human shields. And either that Israel won't strike Hamas because they're protected by the civilians, or if they do and they kill civilians, that will turn world's opinion. So he says, Micha says, you tell me who cares more about Hamas, about Gaza civilians? Israel, which wants the civilians out of the way, or Hamas, which wants them in the way to either die or to inflame world opinion, or to disincentivize Israel from finishing the job. So he said but Israel is not going to be dissuaded, because it is existential. And October 7th, that every Israeli gets, that what October 7th reveals is the Holocaust is alive and well and on the other end of the fence. And there can't be an Israel if there is a Hamas. So there's complete unanimity that we must destroy Hamas. And therefore, because of the nature of Hamas, Gaza civilians will die. So Micha's ask is that we make a vow. The Hebrew word is neder. That we make a neder of unconditional love and loyalty to Israel. He said it's going to be grisly, and the images are going to be upsetting, and innocent civilians will die. But this is what Israel must do to continue to exist. And what he wants from American Jews, diaspora Jews in general, is a neder, a vow of unconditional love and loyalty. And he gave 2 examples of what he's talking about. He said that Heschel talks about the word ma'amin, to believe, as somebody once had a sense of God, and then they hit a dry season. And maybe the dry season could last their whole life. But what they're in covenant with is that they once had this sense of God. And Heschel says you stay connected to mitzvah and tefillah and Shabbat and community because you want to find that connection that you once had. By the way, Mother Teresa did this quite famously. You know, she apparently had a quite tormented inner life, and as a young woman felt a connection to God and then lost it. And she famously said, you know, I have not been able to pray or connect with God for many years. And she asked her confessor, to whom she confessed, to burn my diary so that the world won't know. And he didn't say yes to her dying wish. He let the world know because that's how important he thought it was to give an example of faith in the face of doubt. So Micha said that's what faith is. Maybe you once felt the presence of God and then you lost it, you stay faithful to it. Or he said more prosaically, a marriage. Couples go up and down in their emotions, but the idea of a covenant is whatever the emotion of the day, you're committed to each other. So he said to us, here's what we need from you. It's gonna get tough, and world opinion has already started to turn, and it's gonna turn even more. What I'm asking for you, what Israel needs, is a vow of unconditional love and loyalty. So I wanted to just present that and ask you for your thoughts on that. Debbie.
Okay, well, I have a new hearing aid in, so I'm not hearing everything you're saying. But I think you, at the end, said that we should all give unconditional love
Yes.
to Israel.
Yes.
Which
No
I'm
matter
sure
the headlines.
I'm sure the vast majority of Jewish Americans stand behind Israel.
Right.
But what are we, 2% of the American public? And I think, I'm related to what Monica said, America was behind intervention in Ukraine 16 months ago, and the vast majority of Americans are behind U.S. aiding Israel. Will that wane will the Israeli PR machine ramp up to remind Americans and the rest of the civilized world that October 7th was a horror. I mean, it was against civilized countries. And as an example, and then today, in today's paper, I read about the thousands of people protesting in Copley Square and marching to the Israeli consulate, where they didn't get in, but what I wanted to say was, I know I'm digressing, but I read in today's paper that there were shouts of Palestine from the river to
Right.
the sea. I mean, the world has to be reminded
Right.
that in the PLO and Hamas documents, they say, the constitutions, if they have it, destroy
Yeah.
Israel. We
So-
want to take over the land.
Yeah, so Debbie, thank you for that, because let's talk about that, because I think we're in for really rough sledding. I was at a vigil at Harvard for Sunday night, and the vigil was student-led, and I'll just share with you, I couldn't sleep Sunday night. I actually had to take melatonin, which I never take, to begin to go to sleep, which didn't really work. But I'll tell you why I couldn't sleep Sunday night. I had the following insight, and you tell me if I'm off or extreme. These Israeli students, there are about 12 of them, they're facing a two-front war. First of all of them know people who were murdered on October 7th. And they all know people who were kidnapped and maimed on October 7th. It's not that they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. They know the actual victims of October 7th. And several of them knew soldiers. 286 soldiers have already died trying to defend those towns and to kill the terrorists. So that's one front war that they faced. But then they faced a whole second front at Harvard, where people they thought were their friends, organizations that they belonged to, professors that they had, including, remarkably, professors in the divinity school, would not condemn Hamas. They won't condemn Hamas, and they won't condemn Hamas because they say that the story doesn't begin with Hamas. The story begins with Israeli occupation. Israel occupied, and therefore that's the beginning of the story. And here's what I realized that I couldn't sleep through. And this is so dark, I don't even know how to process it. When you say that the issue is Israel's occupation, where this happened is not Yehuda and Shomron, not the West Bank. It's not land that's on the other side of the Green Line. It's not land that is considered occupied land. It's not land that we captured in 1967. This is land that was always a part of Israel in 1948. It's indisputably Jewish land. So the only way that a divinity school professor at Harvard who refuses to condemn war crimes committed by Hamas would refuse to condemn war crimes committed by Hamas is if that divinity school professor thinks that Israel is occupying land in Sderot, which means that divinity school professor believes that the sin of Israel is its existence from 1948. That divinity school professor and all these organizations in college campuses at Harvard and others think Israel has no right to exist, period, and that Palestine should be free from sea to sea, since there are about 7.5 million Israelis, This is when I went for the melatonin. What they're really saying is we need a final solution. They're actually Nazis. Divinity school professors at Harvard are Nazis. The Nazi is alive, and it's not just a category in Gaza. Nazi theology is alive at Harvard, in the divinity school, and among undergrads at Harvard and other places, who say from the sea to the sea, Palestine will be free, because what they're saying is we can't have these 7.5 million Israeli Jews. We need a final solution for them. We need a second Holocaust for them. And that's why they don't condemn Hamas. They dig Hamas. They dig Hamas. They approve of Hamas. And when I realized, Shira and I met at Harvard. And I've always loved Harvard. And we fell in love the week of Columbus Day, back when it was called Columbus Day in 1983. And we'd always go back to the campus and the crisp fall and the leaves and the yard, and it was enchanting. For 40 years, we met in 1983. And when we were there on a crisp October night, I felt physically like this place is poison. I felt physically like this place that gave birth to my adult life and to my marriage is toxic. And I felt physically that this place is infiltrated and overrun by Nazis who think that the Jewish people don't deserve a state. And from sea to sea, Palestine will be free. Hamas has kind of got the right idea. We need a new final solution. That's what now, they may not say it, but that's just clear. If they won't condemn Hamas, because the problem begins with our occupation, what they're saying is, we have no right to any part of Israel. And the notion that those are Harvard professors makes me sick to my stomach. But I haven't gone public with that until now, but and that's so dark. I remember Rabbi Chill always taught me you can't talk darkly unless you have something positive, but I actually don't have anything positive. But I think that is what the Jewish people are facing. It's not only that Israel is facing this conflict, the Jewish people are facing conflict. And here's the other crazy thing. You see the news and you see Jewish kids getting arrested at the White House because they want to urge Biden to demand a ceasefire. And these are Jews against genocide, et cetera, et cetera. Would they live in Sderot? They would not live in Sderot. And so I don't even know how to process all the stupidity and all the hate, including the stupidity and the hate that comes from within the Jewish community. But now you can tell me, am I off? Am I too dark? If a little bit, whoever said a little bit, tell me. Yeah, Sandy, tell me where I'm too dark. I would love to be too dark.
Okay, we love you. Just a little bit too dark.
Tell me.
I think that there's probably other reasons that the people at Harvard feel the way they do, the professors, the religious people. There is a humanitarian issue with the Palestinians. I'm not saying that Israel is wrong. I'm 100% for Israel. But there's a larger issue, and people target in on that, and they focus on that, and they get support for that, and they get brainwashed. I think our society is just very vulnerable, and I think that has a lot to do with it. They go along with what's going down Route 9. They're just following the crowd.
Right. I hear that, Sandy, and I would love to think I'm too dark. But one of these undergrads made the following point, and then I'll give you the consolation, because there is some consolation, modicum of consolation. This kid who was actually not an Israeli. He was the American Harvard student at there. He spoke, he told the story that he was in some human rights group at Harvard, and they're always issuing statements. So after George Floyd, they issued a statement against racism, of course. And after the latest episode of police brutality against a black person, they issued a statement of condemning police brutality, of course. And after events of Asian hate, they issued statements against Asian hate. And when gay and lesbian and LGBTQ and trans received hate, they issued statements against it. So this kid says to his friends, okay, now we need to issue a statement. Babies got decapitated. Children got caged. Women got raped and paraded around. And innocent people were murdered in droves. And that's a war crime. We need to issue a statement. You always issue statements. And they wouldn't issue a statement. Even with murder, Holocaust images in real time, they wouldn't order a statement. So I'm thinking they're kind of Nazi, to be honest with you. But two Gentiles, non-Jews in this group, quit with him. They all quit. And these two kids named Theo and Ryan said, what's wrong with you, to this group? How could you not condemn this? What's wrong with you? You've lost your moral bearings. My own read is they've lost their moral bearings because they hate the Jewish people. And they don't think we have a right to a state. And they actually don't criticize Hamas because they agree with it. I think that's a truth that is true. And I think it's a truth that's too dark, at least at this point, to share. Like, I don't think I could give a sermon about it. It's just too dark. I couldn't sleep, and my job is not to make people not sleep. But I don't know. I want to talk to Larry about this because he's always so sage and wise. But I'm wondering what I'm missing. If anyone can tell me what I'm missing, how you look at rape and decapitation and you say, I'm not going to condemn it, give me a less dark interpretation of that. And by the way, that's very repercussive of college campuses throughout our country. It's definitely Harvard. It's not just Harvard, it's Stanford, it's Columbia, it's everywhere. And it's not just college campuses. It is also, these rallies, et cetera. So I will say, but also to end on a positive note, at least the most recent polls I've seen, something like 48% of Americans think President Biden is doing just right. Something like 26% wish he was doing more. Only 18% think that he's not doing enough. And the evangelical Christian community is with us. I am loving evangelical Christians. And it's kind of a crazy world when I'm more evangelical Christian than I am Harvard. Wendy?
So I was going to say that I worry, I think people like of our generation and older all love Israel. I think there are some young kids that are all love Israel. And Jessica, my younger daughter, lives in London and works for a company owned by Google. And Sundar sent out a letter about what happened. And she emailed back, it's not enough, you need to do more. This is fine, but you need to go farther in your sympathy. What I find at Penn, which is where I went, which was always very sympathetic to Jews, it's just horrible. And I think one of the differences is speaking out. And you have thousands of alumni that have spoken out. And Mark Rowan has gone on TV and shed a spotlight on it. And I think that everybody needs to speak out so that it doesn't happen again. I have sent emails to the administration about why I'm not heading up the Newton Brookline Alumni Interviewing Association committee anymore, and I think that that needs to be done from all generations because it is not the same environment that my kids of 2017 and 19 went to college. It's not the same environment. for
What
me.
happened? Like, how did Penn change and become so different from
So
2019?
it's really funny, and I put this in my letter. I interviewed, most kids from Newton South don't get into Penn, but I interviewed an Israeli that actually got in and went, and we spoke about it, and he asked me about Jewish life, and I said, it's so supportive. And my girls, last year, before any of this happened, I was telling them about how excited I was. They're like, Mom, it's not like that anymore. And part of it is, I remember when Susie was at Hillel and they were all freaked out because SJP was coming to campus and it was a big meeting with Mike Urim and what do we do? There is this, we have raised our kids to be so caring and so open to the other that they've lost their sense of, they think everything's equivalent. And they don't see that sometimes there's right and wrong. It's not just everybody is in need. And I think that's why kids are open to intermarriage, because everyone is the same. And we have to help everybody. And I think that there's this sense that if you're downtrodden, it's somebody's fault. And we need to make it better. And we need to fix it. It's the, I'm not exactly sure. But it's really scary when
Well, only one question, I
the
suppose.
next generation.
I suppose it's a rhetorical question because there's not really an answer for it, but I would say to those college kids whose sympathies are with the oppressed, how come the victims of October 7th aren't oppressed? Why aren't children who are kidnapped and women who are raped and grandparents who are murdered, why aren't they oppressed?
Well, and what I say is I personally don't understand how hard stop you can't separate the political piece of it
Right.
from, I don't care who you are. Murdering babies, women, and children is hard stop wrong.
Right.
There is no political reason for
Unless-
getting it done.
Unless
it's
you're a Nazi.
Jew.
Unless you're a Nazi. And if you're a Nazi, all those are appropriate. And I'm just letting the facts speak for themselves.
And I also think, I've been pounding my Christian friends about how upsetting it is. Some get it, some don't. One will hide me in her barn in Squam Lake, and it has a gym, so that's great. But I think we need to make every non-Jew a party to this so that they understand, that they don't think it's just our neurosis, because what you're seeing on TV now, I saw, to echo what you said yesterday, I had never heard this. There's, some Palestinian ambassador making the rounds on TV, and he talks about the occupation. For 75 years, they've occupied us. I've never heard that. But
No,
that's what they're now allowed
Right,
saying
that-
in the public sphere.
And that narrative that for 75 years they've been occupied means that the Jewish people have no right to a state, which means that we need a final solution because we have another 7.5 million Jews, and Hamas gets that, and that's why they approve of Hamas. So it's too dark to state, but I, you know what? Last time in the 30s and 40s, our people were too slow to get it. I think we need to start calling out Nazis at Harvard. I think there are Nazis at Harvard, and we need to start calling it out. When you say Israel's occupied for 75 years, you are a Nazi.
You're complicit.
Monica, and we'll close with this.
There was a meeting last week in Newton about anti-Semitism at the War Memorial by City Hall. ADL gave the example of somebody at Harvard. She was a student in a class, and the teacher had decided that it was important that day to discuss what happened in Israel. And the teacher told her to step out because she'd probably be uncomfortable and shouldn't be in class, and she had to step out. So your feelings, I think, are real, your observations are real, your darkness is real, and there's a prayer, right, that says there's a time for everything on earth. I think there's a time to be dark and see reality for what it is, and your melatonin story is what we need to hear. I don't think we need to be optimistic. I think we need to be real for now. There's a time for everything, and I appreciate you sharing your darkness. I'm sorry about your sleepless nights that we're all having, but I think that's the place we need to be in now.
Thank you, Monica. So I just want to end, thank you, Monica. I want to end with an observation. How many of you saw A Prayer for the French Republic at Huntington? You know, it's about French anti-Semitism, and the big theme or the symbol in A Prayer for the French Republic was pianos, because this was a Jewish family that sold pianos, and pianos are big and heavy and kind of unmovable, and these French families stayed behind in France because they didn't want to give up their pianos, and so many of them died. And as the playwright narrates the story, and you all know this, there's a natural aversion to darkness, and there's a natural yearning for light, and there's a natural human tendency to deny. And so many of our people in the 30s, before the Wannsee Conference, who might have left, didn't leave because of their piano, so to speak, and they were influenced to have false hope, and they were too silent. So I want to say, as part of my vow, my neder for Israel, I think we need to call out deep Jew hatred and deep Nazi ideology that is in America today. When you say that Israel's occupied for 75 years, what you are saying is that the Jewish people don't deserve a homeland. When you say the Jewish people don't deserve a homeland, what you're saying is there's 7.5 million Israeli Jews, they need a final solution. I think we need to go dark, and I think we need to call out the truth, that there are Nazis in academia, that these college campuses are dangerous spaces for our kids, and I think we need to fight back. Come tonight at 6:45 for Mincha and Maariv. At 7 o'clock, we're going to have a rally. We're going to raise big money for Israel. By the way, here's one big difference. When the Holocaust happened, the Jewish people didn't have power. Now we do. Now's the time to use it. Boker Tov.